Bengaluru is warming up faster than most of us are prepared for. The same heat wave can feel completely different depending on who you are, where you live, and what you can afford.
If we take an example of, say, heating in the city in the summers, we are equipped to face fast-changing challenge like this only if we have the money, for example, or access to the right kind of infrastructure. The experience would be very different for an outdoor worker who probably don't have access to even drinking water, and their workspaces or the kind of work that they do often also defines their accessibility and availability to these kind of infrastructure that is needed to face climate change.
And the difference to this access is stark, especially in informal settlements.
These are the areas which are mostly getting affected because there is no also space for these kinds of settlements in the city's management or city planning. They are also living on a low-lying areas, and at the same time it creates that heat island effects in the settlements, and that's why they are more vulnerable towards urban heat impact and also urban flooding impact.
And beyond the city's edge, such climate impacts are already pushing people to move. For many migrant workers, Bengaluru is both a refuge and a new site of risk.
It is not that the climate-related factors are the only factors that are leading people to distress migration or unsafe migration. But what we have realized is that the existing socio-economic conditions, the existing vulnerabilities are exacerbated by the climate conditions or the extreme weather events.
In response, a set of organizations across Bengaluru started coming together, not as separate projects, but to implement one shared experiment for a fair urban transition.
Now, if I have to implement something on the ground, what exactly does it look like? And this is where the entire FUT collective, as a set of organizations who has very different expertise, starting from scientific evidence creation to accounting for very grounds up and lived realities. So this lived reality bit is something that has been largely missing from the formal planning process.
In a city like Bangalore, which is expanding and scaling up in ways that we never comprehended, the challenges of climate change really manifests in quite complex ways. So it becomes very important that young people, especially from the local communities, they have the agency and then the right supporting ecosystem to address these challenges.
When I started a climate change project, I used to go for the field. So what I did, first I did a small survey with the area community peoples. After taking that, I got a detail that some youths are there in our area. So I gathered first parents to the area. For all the parents were gathering, I used to do weekly once one community awareness. And in that community awareness, I used to say about the plastic, why we should not use the plastic. So I used to give awareness starting about the plastic, because in this area, many people, they will drink the tea in the cover. So I used to say for them, we should not purchase the hot things in the plastic. If you take that, we will affect in the, now we will not affect, in the future definitely we will affect with the cancer or some ladies fibrotic diseases and all. So totally we have to avoid the plastic. I used to give the awareness for all the people, and people were very interested to ask this and all. Then slowly I carry with them of climate change project.
This kind of slow, patient work with different vocabularies for different people is how FFF partners are building a shared picture of climate vulnerability.
First of all, we realize that there is a lot of awareness that is required on climate-related aspects. If you go and talk to an informal settlement community member, if you talk to internal migrants, probably the language of the climate change is not something that is easily understood by them. At the same time, we realize it's very, very important to build the community agency, because at the end of the day, the agency of the community, the informal workers themselves will have to find solutions to the problems that they are facing.
The FFF is just as much about building the leadership and confidence of people who are usually left out of city planning as it is about building these narratives together.
One is even to start this kind of conversation and think that it's important to collect data It can be quantitative or qualitative, collecting stories of how people experience this, of say a particular working class, say like Paura Karmikas, is very important because what they face seasonally or what are some of their challenges work-wise, what needs to be done for them, becomes an answer for what can be done for other Paura Karmikas in the city, for example, having a resting space, having a place for them to hydrate, or even for them to change clothes, especially the women, become very important because these kind of infrastructure may or may not exist in all the spaces.
But at the same time, we also work from the perspective of bringing that community leadership through our Nammajagli platform. Just to give you one example, through Nammajagli itself, we were able to create that leadership in one of the community where that community, when the floods were happening, at that time they themselves went and had a conversation with ward committee to clean up their drainages and so that the water can flow properly. And that's why that one small action helped to reduce the flood impact in the community.
And similar stories are unfolding all throughout Bengaluru. For example, let's take this youth leader in DJ Halli.
So I started with DJ Ali. So few students, they drawed the well. Ma'am, near the well there is a garbage. It was very dirty where the community lives next to that well. Like 300 houses or something is there. But when I went and saw, it was fully mixed with sewage water, garbages, where all the fish was dying. Everything was happened.
And over the next sort of 6 months to 12 months, she really engaged the system stakeholders, the decision makers, the water department, the BWSSPs and the PBMPs, and then also with the communities to really drive water rejuvenation, open well rejuvenation work, which probably like 70-100-year-old, and which was quite a complex issue to challenge unless communities and the community leaders, the systems, everyone sort of coming together. And then with the technical support of Biome and Sama Foundation, also the support coming in from corporates as well, she drove this whole initiative of rejuvenating the well, which really sort of culminated with a drinking water unit, ending up with more than 500 to 700 households having good quality water access.
FFF is also about changing how the city imagines who climate action is for, especially the marginalized population on whom the entire city is dependent.
We work with women from the informal workforce because they are the ones carrying the actual weight of the city. Their knowledge is real and their experience is even more so. But it's almost entirely absent from the way the city gets planned. What participatory art combined with genuine government engagement at the local level does is give that knowledge a form that the city can't ignore. When 350 people sat in a voting chair at our mobile bus installation, the MTC officials came, journalists came, and 3 new bus routes now serve these communities. But more than the routes, what's changed is the scope of what these women believe they can actually ask for. It's expanded to parks, to heat shelters, to climate action planning. And now the work is to bring these stories, the ward findings, community voices, the data, into one shared narrative for a fairer Bengaluru.
Model Ward acts as a good inspiration to just start these kind of conversations and even to be able to demonstrate certain kind of experiments and pilot these new initiatives to see what works and what doesn't work. Once we are able to pilot it in or test it out in 1 or 2 wards, then we're able to see what works for, say, the next 10 wards, which might be very different from what might work for the next 300 wards.
And this helps people better understand each other's realities and then move towards solutions that serve the wider public good. In a ward assembly, residents can review information about the local infrastructure, services and the civic challenges, and they can jointly then develop and prioritize proposals for the ward's annual plan and budget. I think that the sort of an annual civic citizens assembly or a climate assembly, it would keep the climate plan dynamic and responsive to citizens' needs, more accountable and also adaptable to the changing and uneven impacts of climate change. And it will certainly also strengthen the public ownership of the city's climate future.
And through the Fair Futures Forum, such initiatives at the ward level then inform the formalized city planning processes through initiatives like the War Climate Action Plan.
Essentially, it helps to become the bridge or create such bridges where a top-down plan meets the bottom-up lived realities in order to then create very tangible, implementable, if I am to say, projects or initiatives or programs, which then can become much more long-lasting and sustainable and impactful going forward.
To see how what happened right now to be replicated in other wards or other parts of Bangalore, it becomes very important through the Fair Future Forum, getting that sort of constant support and the stakeholder engagement in the coming years to create a platform where these young leaders from Ashantinagar, ward and some other wards in Bangalore, where problems may not be exactly the same, but the texture of the problem will be the slightly different, and nuances of those textures will be different. So that's where I think understanding how the systemic connects happen. How did communities come together to address a certain challenge in Shantinagar? So what were those processes? What were those connections that actually made this possible? So the nuances of these learnings could be taken forward to other young leaders in other pockets of the city as well.
And what I also really see this moving forward or expanding is that, when we look at the funding, which will really help us to also see this scale up in reality. Because when we see things from a humanistic approach, it can't always be kept in numbers or data.
Longest journey starts with the shortest step. Maybe the FFF, the Fair Futures Forum, is the beginning of that long journey. And at the end of the day, we need to find these realized into true actions, especially for the most vulnerable communities that all of us reach out to.
Join us in this collaborative endeavor of building a climate resilient and a fair future for all residents of Namma Bengaluru.